For YouTube channels such as mine that focus a lot on historical European martial arts, the medieval period, arms and armor of Europe, there's kind of a hallmark for channels like mine. Whether you're watching Matt Easton on Schola Gladiatoria, you're watching Scholagrim, you're watching Shad out of Shadiversity or Metatron, or really any of those guys that really have that as a primary focus, one of the things that happens a lot is we have, I would call almost an overreaction to other types of swords and other types of martial arts, really specifically talking about other cultures and more specifically talking about Asian cultures. This is honestly, I think, an overreaction. It's kind of a polarizing overreaction that so strongly denies the martial arts of other cultures, or so strongly denies the quality of those weapons for their purposes, that we tend to end up with a lot of videos that say long swords are better than katanas, and katanas are crap, and you know, the fighting styles of Europeans were just as good, and you should pay more attention to this, and blah, 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 blah. One of the things that I actually tried to not do is exactly that, and there's one reason for it, and that's because despite my heavy interest in the European medieval period and in European arms and armor, and specifically historical European martial arts, it doesn't mean that I don't have an interest in or an appreciation in the martial arts of other cultures, and specifically Asian martial arts. In fact, I have quite a great deal of respect for people who practice those martial arts, who understand those weapons. I have a great deal of respect of the weapons themselves, how they're made, even something like a katana. There's a lot of skill that goes into making a sword like that, and there's a lot that can be appreciated there. But for me, it doesn't just end in Japanese culture or European culture. I have an interest in all sorts of arms and armor. In fact, a lot of items that I'll be getting over the next couple months are going to branch well outside of the norm in terms of weapons that most people would add to their armory. And that's because I want to not just be representative of a specific region or a specific time range. I want to be representative of the martial heritage of the globe. One of the things I'm really passionate about outside of the European history element is just military history and how these things worked, and how weapons developed, and how they were unique to their cultures. So I have that real big passion, and I think it's great when we see something like historical European martial arts happening elsewhere. All this to say that I've actually come across a website recently. I was unaware of it. Maybe you were. I think it actually has been around for a little while, but it's called ChineseLongsword.com. And I haven't done a ton of research into it. Just came across it. I actually just picked up a couple books that I need to dive into. But essentially what the conceit of this effort is, from an individual named Jack Chen, who does a lot of the translation and a lot of the work on this. Again, ChineseLongsword.com. It's not all that different from historical European martial arts of going back to the source, right? We in HEMA have to go back to the source because those arts, as martial arts, are either so vastly changed from what they were intended to be, or so vastly lost to time that we have to completely recreate them as best we can, with knowing that there's no actual tradition for it. You go to a culture like Japan, where the culture, that martial culture, is actually ingrained to some extent within their society, ingrained to some extent with their kind of social spiritualism, that they have a great respect still for their weapons, their heritage, their martial arts. And you will have pockets of people who have learned in what's essentially, you know, non-broken traditions over many centuries, and that's something to really be appreciated and admired and respected. But what does happen with something like Japanese martial arts with McDojos, as they are commonly referred to, which is essentially just a watering down of the martial arts to teach kids some acrobatics and aerobics and maybe how to throw a punch, but not a real good heavy focus on martial arts. And while those do exist, there are schools that do the opposite. They really focus on the martial art. Likewise, in HEMA, we have this big deal with European martial arts not really always focusing on the martial art aspect and getting a little bit too tied up in tournaments. But one of the interesting things about Chinese martial culture is, again, it still exists, But it's actually been heavily influenced in years of them focusing more on the art side of the martial arts. And what I mean by that is certainly more recently in film and in popular media, you see a lot of their martial arts being much more fanciful and looking much more ornate, is the only way I can really think to describe it, and being very viewable by an audience. And then you can go find other movies that are so raw and gritty and do the martial arts justice that they're kind of hard to follow, and they aren't quite as visually exciting to mass audiences. But one of the things that happens with all of this is that it just kind of gets passed down, but there's no going back to the source. The source is always just the next person who's handed it down. Now, that's a broad generalization. I want to call that out. This is not every single use case, but a broad generalization would say that there's some watering down or some misconceptions that will leak into and bleed into the martial arts of some of these cultures, specifically the Chinese culture. And that's what Jack Chen is doing with these books. He's actually going back to the source. This is essentially historical European martial arts, except it's in China, so it's historical Chinese martial arts. Doesn't have quite an easy acronym to roll off the tongue. But it's really interesting because a lot of it is not all that dissimilar from what we have in European martial arts, where you have text that is just in the Chinese writings, and then there's a kind of translation into what would essentially be a English vernacular version or a westernized script, and then an actual translation. So the example would be application number 36, which I randomly selected, is I use drip water to ensure his small door, in quotes. He uses invert to counter me. I shall sink on my back leg and swiftly kill in, aiming for his chest. You could read something like that, and although some of the terminology might be different, it doesn't really sound all that different from what you might actually get from historical European martial arts, where they say, you know, I throw a Zorn and it goes to a Zorn Ort, but he parries strongly, and so I Zwerkow to his opening, right? Or something like that. And I just made that up, so don't quote me, right? But I find it really fascinating this is happening now with Chinese martial arts. And it's really also cool because you get with some of these, the original, and these are scans that have been modified, but you get original images that come with the art that was in some of these treaties. And that's what they call them. They call these a treatise, which is great. So we're actually using very similar terminology with our Asian brothers out there. And that's really, really cool. So this actually makes me really excited. Now, ChineseLongsword.com, all these books, they're sold. There's a profit that goes into it. Jack Chen, I'm sure, makes money off all this. He puts the effort into it. I'm not going to begrudge him that. We are lucky in the HEMA group, the community, that we have something like Wigton Hour that does a really good job making a lot of these resources free to us. But the people who put in the effort to actually translate and make it like a nice fight book, new fight book, modern fight book for us to learn off of, you know, we pay them for their books, right? And I think that this is right now kind of like almost a one-man effort here, and he's going through and he's writing this stuff, and he's got very interesting insight in the little that I have looked into what he's posted, some of the videos I've looked at his online. He's just as much being experimental and trying to figure out what actually works best from a martial validity standpoint. And I think that that's something we should greatly support within a martial arts community. And again, you're going to have so many people that will say, well, I only do historical European martial arts. Everything else is for the birds, right? But I'm actually not of that mindset. I wish I could live forever just so I could learn a lot of different martial arts. There's aspects of all of them that I just find fascinating, and the way they develop over time, and how they develop to meet the weapon designs and the needs according to what their enemies were. It's really fascinating, and I think, again, it's something that should be really, truly appreciated, and we shouldn't just look down our nose at, being of a Western European persuasion in our interests. So definitely check out ChineseLongsword.com. Once I have a chance to go through these books a bit more, I'll probably be better set to kind of give a recommendation or not on buying them. But I think I got these two for about $60, and they were printed and shipped to me, I believe, from overseas. And they're bound in kind of an interesting little traditional binding method. I'm really happy with the purchase. I really can't wait to kind of dive into it. And this can be much more academic for me because I'm not really going to spend the time to actually go out and try to develop this as a martial skill. I got too much to do in the historical European martial arts realm. But I do think it's fascinating. I think it's something that should be supported within the community. We, as a group of kind of just historical martial artists, should really, really help support each other's communities. And I think that's important. I know I have actually seen the Chinese longsword articles referenced in some of the Western European martial arts forums out there, like the subreddit for Western martial arts, or HEMA. So I've seen it. It kind of gets passed around. There's certainly some articles that are just as applicable no matter where in the world your martial art is coming from. But I think this stuff is really cool, and I think it's a really noble effort on his part, and I wish him the best of luck in continuing to do these translations and bring these sources to us. He's actually got quite a lot. They've got a lot of different treaties on a lot of different items, just like we have pole hammer, quarterstaff, sword and buckler, all these unarmored, wrestling, armored with all these weapons, sickles, all stuff. Just like we have that, they have that. They have, dowels and straight swords and long swords and spears and pole arms, and it's really cool. And there's a lot of information out there. He's got DVDs. He's got links to videos. So definitely check it out. ChineseLongsword.com. I think it's an interesting, noble effort. Best of luck to Jack Chen, and guys, let's make sure that as a community in the Western martial arts, the historical European martial arts community, that we still respect other martial arts and other martial artists, because at the end of the day, we're all putting our effort, our heart, our soul into learning these things and to better ourselves, and we should never look down on anyone for their choice. As long as they put in the effort, we should give them the respect for it. So I think it's good stuff. I can't wait to see what comes from it. Can't wait to see really other martial arts kind of come more to the forefront, and we can get rid of the kind of standard karate and taekwondo and actually bring those back to kind of our raw, true understanding of what those martial arts were. I think there's some really cool things that can come from that. So that's it. That was my slight rant on how I feel we fit into the larger martial arts community. And my note of some interesting books that can be grabbed. I hope this was an interesting video. I have no idea. I'm sure I've rambled on long enough. So see you later, guys. Have a good one.